So you've budgeted 50 or 60 grand to spend on a new car and you've decided to go with a premium sedan. There's the benchmark-setting BMW 3 Series, the best-selling Mercedes-Benz C-Class, or the always popular Audi A4. But my question for you is, would you consider a Genesis G70 instead? So if you made it through that intro, I'm assuming your answer to my question is yes, or at the very least maybe, but it is a tough question to answer. What's Genesis all about and why should you consider it in the first place? Should you even consider it? I mean, after all, it is relatively new and kind of an upstart brand. If you don't know much about its history, well, it's Hyundai's luxury brand that it spun off of its own lineup. It used to be a standalone model in the Hyundai lineup, and now it's its own brand with 3 separate models and a 4th on its way. Curiously, Hyundai decided to start with 3 sedan models, and the G70 is the smallest of the 3. Like I said off the top, it competes with things like the BMW 3 Series or the Mercedes C-Class. I've got to say, from where I'm sitting, the G70 does a pretty good impersonation of something like a 3 Series, though it does feel a little bit outdated. So let's cover some of that stuff first. Take these HVAC controls, they just seem a little bit down market compared to what you get with other luxury brands. You could say the same thing about some of the plastics used in here as well as some of the buttons. If you look at the memory seat buttons or these window switches, well, they're pulled directly from Hyundai models. And that to me just comes up a little bit short of expectations in a premium car. And the same goes for the infotainment system. It's a carbon copy of the one that you can get in the cheapest Hyundai model. And that to me is a big disappointment. Don't get me wrong, this is one of the better infotainment systems on the mainstream market, but it's just not up to the standards that you expect in a modern-day luxury car. It also lacks the kind of gimmickry you get with BMW in its gesture control or voice recognition software. And you know, that's the kind of stuff that really helps elevate an infotainment system. And it would go a long way to making this one feel like it's on an equal playing field with those instead of trying to be something that it's not. Since we're on the topic of the cabin, we do need to address just how tiny it is in here. I get the fact that this is a small sedan, but it is very cramped inside. I have almost no headroom. I feel really squeezed in the shoulders, and you should see me try to get into the back seat. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I know this is a small sedan, and there is the larger G80 if you need more room, but that's not the point, because if you compare this to something like a 3 Series or a C-Class, this is much smaller inside. And the same goes with the trunk. There's about 50% less space, and there's only around 300 liters in there. And it's also very shallow, which means bigger items are going to pose a problem when you need to stuff them in the trunk. It's not all bad inside though, and I do have to say that these seats are very comfortable, and I dig the quilted leather you get on the seats and the door panels. I also like that you can get it in a few different colors in this Prestige trim. Instead of just the black you get in the Sport, you can choose black, brown, or this ivory color. This light shade is going to be prone to denim staining, so keep that in mind if it's on your shopping list, but it does help to elevate this thing and make it feel like a premium car. There's also a really nice sense of control from this driver's seat, which brings us to the highlight of the G70, and that's the way it drives. If the name Albert Biermann sounds familiar, that's because he was an engineering exec at BMW for years, and he was responsible for some of the brand's most iconic M3 and M5 models. Hyundai lured him away from BMW a few years ago to head up chassis development for Genesis, Hyundai, and Kia, and the G70 was one of his first projects, and it might be his best yet. There's a very distinct feel to a German premium car, and that is tattooed all over this thing. I would describe it as a nice balance between nimbleness and firm athleticism. It feels nice and light on its toes, but not too skittish. But it also feels nice and heavy without feeling like it's anchored to the pavement. It's a unique combination, and it is absolutely nailed to perfection here. Even without the adaptive dampers you get in the fully loaded Sport model, this suspension is tuned perfectly. It's soft enough that it's comfortable cruising around, and it absorbs most bumps without you even noticing them. But when you want to have a little bit of fun, it's firm enough that it pushes back just enough, and it doesn't have the sloppy body roll you get in some other sedans. The steering also feels great, and there's just enough feedback without you needing to wrestle with it, but you can add some more resistance if you flick it into Sport mode through this drive mode selector on the center console. There are 5 different drive modes to choose from. There's Comfort, Eco, Smart, and Sport, but there's also a custom mode that lets you mix and match different settings because it adjusts things like the steering, throttle response, and the all-wheel drive system. Let's say you want to go have some fun, but you don't like the heavy steering that you get with the standard Sport mode. Well, you can use the Sport throttle mapping and all-wheel drive setting, but you can use the Comfort steering, so you can really tailor the experience to your own individual preference. The G70 is offered with 2 engine options. There's a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, or there's a twin turbocharged V6, and that's the one I'm driving. It's a 3.3-liter engine, and it puts out 365 horsepower to go along with 376 pound-feet of torque. That's a little bit less than you get in the Mercedes-AMG C43, but it's about in line with the BMW M340i or the Audi A4. There is a little bit of turbo lag when you first tip into the throttle, but it doesn't last very long because all that torque comes online at just 1300 RPM, which is way lower than any of its 3 main competitors, and it really gives this thing a punchy feel when you get your foot into it. That also means this thing will run from a standstill to 100 kilometers an hour in less than 5 seconds, which is plenty fast, and it's in line with all of its competitors. Sending all that engine output to the all-wheel drive system is an 8-speed automatic transmission that cracks off lightning-quick shifts. It's got paddle shifters as well, and I like the fact that once you use them, it stays in the manual mode instead of defaulting back to automatic if you don't use the paddles for a couple seconds. It won't let you over-rev though, so if you get your foot into it and you don't shift up quick enough, it will do it on its own, but it stays in that manual mode until you set it back to drive. There is one version of the 2-liter G70 that comes with a manual transmission, but honestly, it's not worth the sacrifice because this engine is just too good to pass up. I personally love manual transmissions, and both of my cars are manual, but I like this engine just too much to choose the stick in this car. Like I said earlier, there's a range-topping Sport model that comes with adaptive dampers as well as a limited slip rear differential and stickier summer tires, but I really like the mark that this Prestige model hits. It skews to a more premium end of the styling spectrum, but you still get that bigger engine as well as Brembo brakes that help it stop just a little bit quicker. The other thing about that Sport model is that, yeah, it's got the performance chops to keep up with the competition, but it doesn't look like it. Take something like the Audi A4. When you step up to the S4, you can tell by looking at it. It's got those S badges as well as some cool styling cues. Yeah, you get some styling elements in the G70, but not enough to help it stand out and give it a real presence. Something else this Prestige model has going for it is that because it doesn't have those adaptive dampers or that limited slip differential, it's a few $1,000s cheaper than the Sport model, so that's something to keep in mind too. Now that brings us to the G70's biggest advantage in the market, and that's its price. A base version will set you back 42 grand, but it comes with some pretty reasonable stuff. There's a decent driver assistance suite that has things like adaptive cruise control, an 8-inch touchscreen with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and all-wheel drive. Now that's about 4 grand cheaper than the base version of the Mercedes-Benz C-Class or the Audi A4, and about 9 grand less than a BMW 3 Series. The version I'm driving, well, it's about 56 grand before tax, which is very competitive. That's a few grand less than the cheapest version of the AMG C43 and the Audi S4, and it's way less expensive than a BMW M340i. Something else to note about the price you pay for a Genesis is what you see is what you get. Aside from taxes, it's all included. There's no extra freight or PDI charge. So the one I'm driving, it's 56 grand before tax, and that's it. Sure, there's AC tax on top of that as well as the HST you're going to pay in Ontario, but you don't have to worry about a couple grand in extra fees. Genesis will also deliver the car directly to you, and it will pick it up and leave you a loaner if yours needs maintenance, which is a cool feature. But on the flip side, it just doesn't have the cachet that a luxury brand has. Take BMW. It's got that badge envy, and it's something that's going to make you feel good about driving and probably make your neighbors a little bit jealous. This one, not so much because there isn't much familiarity or brand awareness. Sure, that may come in time, but in the meantime, you're probably going to have to explain to your friends exactly what it is you're driving because they've never heard of it. To recap, I like the G70's outstanding ride and handling, punchy V6 engine, and the variety of trim options. I'm not a fan of the outdated interior details, the cramped cabin, or the lack of cachet for the money. The Genesis G70 is a bit of a conundrum on wheels. It's objectively excellent to drive and it delivers a ton of value, a trait that's not common in luxury cars. But on the other hand, it doesn't deliver the kind of badge envy that you get with a brand like BMW. And at the end of the day, that's part of what you're paying for with the premium car ownership experience.